You are listening to the audio portion of the QB Power Hour webinar series. The QB Power Hour is a free biweekly webinar series for accounting professionals presented by Michelle Long and Dan DeLong, who are very passionate about the industry, QuickBooks, and apps that integrate with QuickBooks. You can find out all the details about the webinar series at qbpowerhour.com. So without further ado, here's Michelle and Dan.
Thanks everybody for joining us today, and glad to have you all joining us. Welcome for downloading and working with QBO Data with Power Query. Very glad to have you guys all joining us today. We got some great stuff for you today. We are going to be, never mind. My name is Michelle Long, owner of Long for Success, speaker for Intuit, author of several different books, but that's enough about me. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, my name is Dan DeLong, owner at Danwit, worked at Intuit for nearly 18 years, co-hosting today also at Workshop Wednesdays over at School of Bookkeeping. And for the past four or 5 years, I've been doing the tech editing for the QBO for Dummies series. And glad to having David joining us today, who's the author of the book. So it's really nice full circle type of situation here. I was just throwing out the ideas. Hey, you should come on the QB Power Hour, talk about how weird it is to write books about technical stuff. That is but he actually came up with a greater idea of talking about an idea that he discovered about downloading data from QBO and on top of that. So we'll chat a little bit about with David, but we'll also he has some Excel, the wizardry of Excel to talk about.
Hello, I'm David Ringstrom. I'm a CPA in Utah. I am an entirely non-traditional CPA. I've never actually worked in public accounting. Back in the day, maybe you still can, but back in the day in Georgia, if you worked under a CPA for 5 years, you could meet the experience requirements. And I had a boss who kept telling me I should sit for the exam. And I've been eternally grateful to him for that. So my background is I've been a spreadsheet consultant since the early 90s. And over the years, that parlayed into writing articles about Excel. I did that for about 20 years and kept my eye on the prize and started doing technical editing, which Dan does as well. Dan has greatly improved my QuickBooks for Dummies series. I took over that 4 versions ago, and Dan has been the technical editor for all 4 of those. It's a blessing and a curse when you take over the text from a previous author. It's nice to not start from zero, but looking back, I probably would have rather started with 0 because it has taken me 4 versions to really fully get the material organized into a fashion that I think is really now the way to talk about QuickBooks Online. So that 4th edition is coming out November 22nd. If you bought previous editions of QuickBooks Online, thank you for that. This newest edition is definitely my best work. I'm always working to improve things. I also wrote a book last year, exploring Microsoft Excel's hidden treasures, so that was a bucket list goal for my career for accountants, for college students, and then have online classes. So that's me in a nutshell.
And when you took over the authorship of the QBO for Dummies, the ability or the chapters that you included about Excel were like, oh my goodness, I can't do this. I can't be the technical editor for that because one, I'm using Mac versus a PC to do that, all those steps. And it was not a dummy level version of what you were doing in Excel. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom of the things that you can do in Excel. So if you do purchase the book, there are some great chapters in there of value adds of using Excel in QuickBooks Online directly, but you have some other nuggets to discuss about today. So a little bit of the details about the QB Power Hour webinar series every other Tuesday at 12 Eastern, assuming we start on time, but not eligible for CPA credit, but check the website for upcoming events. We also have the PDFs, the slides, recording, podcasts, and other resources at qbpowerhour.com/resources. A little bit of the housekeeping. If you have specific questions for David or Michelle or myself as we go through this particular content, of course, they're all going to be redirected to David because he's the expert on the material that he's delivering here today. Please put them in the Q&A because that will also make it a lot easier for us to follow up if it's something that we have to table or put in a parking lot. Any kind of comments, please put those in the chat. But again, try to direct questions into the Q&A section. We also have the links as well as for the webinar archive as well. And we will post the handouts link in the chat so everybody has access to that if you have to them already. So our agenda here today is to chat with David, some of the challenges about authoring technical books, and then an introduction to the Power Query. So we have a lot of power that we're talking here on the Power Hour, the Power Query and the QB Power Hour, and then linking QBO data to Excel by the way of that Power Query. So David, we talked a little bit about your history. How did you get, where did Excel come into the picture for you? Or is it just because of the nature of accounting and that's really where things started for you?
I feel like I sealed my fate back in the late 80s. The first spreadsheet I ever saw was Lotus 123, and it was the DOS version. And I will never forget that day. I sat down for a computer, I pulled up Lotus 123, and in the DOS version, you had to hit the slash key to get a menu. So all I saw on the screen was just this grid that you arrowed around. And I said, that's a stupid program. You can't do anything with it. And so Karma said, okay. And ultimately, I've moved into working in commercial real estate. And one of the things that really sealed my fate on wanting to become better adept at spreadsheets was I was working as a bookkeeper back in the day when the computer system printed the tenant bills. If they were wrong, we had to retype them on a typewriter, which obviously is very tedious. So I figured out how to create a spreadsheet that I could put on the screen and check my work, and then print it on that dot matrix printer that would do the carbon copies. And from there, I was hooked, and I became an in-house spreadsheet guru, and then just parlayed that into a consulting career. I left my day job in 1998, so it's been 25 years being self-employed now.
Right.
Yeah, I remember a specific coworker added to it. He's if you can imagine it, you can do it in Excel. I'm like, oh my goodness, that is too much power.
It's a lot of power, and most folks barely get even at 1% of it. Decades in, I'm still learning stuff about Excel, which I love that. I love that there's always more new stuff to learn and do. In a lot of my career, I spent a lot of time writing programming code to automate things. And what the beauty of Power Query, that you're creating automation without writing any code. And you can set up these set and forget connections to your QuickBooks reports, because QuickBooks in particular does all kinds of jacked up things to the data when they send it to Excel. Fortunately, the new enhanced report format, I guess they're calling it, does let you export to a CSV format, and that eliminates all the weird formatting that they do. But for a while, they've since fixed that. But when you exported a report from that enhanced format, your dollar amounts were text fields. You've been figuring that out with them because they were text. You had to stop and clean them up, which you can do that with Power Query. When they send dates over, they are still treated as text, which means you can't then do date-based things. In Power Query, lets you set up these connections. You just keep overwriting the same download file, and your cleaned up data pops into your spreadsheet.
Nice. Now, what challenges have you seen besides the obvious of authoring books based on technical issues? Like what has your experiences been? And Michelle, you could probably add in your insights as well. But what have you experienced about that? I always thought it was just weird when somebody approached me and said, "Hey, would you like to technical edit an online version of QuickBooks?" I'm like, it's going to be outdated before
Right.
it's even published. How has that been? How's that experience been for you?
It was particularly frustrating with this edition that I wrote over the summer, because Intuit would turn features on and off. And I would write about it in an early draft, and then when it came back around for the author review, it was completely different. And it's pick a lane. And Excel is somewhat getting to that space too, because if you use the Microsoft 365, it's a subscription platform, so they can just stream stuff out. Those of us have been using computers for a long time. Back in the day, the software was the software. It didn't change. Now in the cloud, all bets are off. You log in a new day and ta-da, particularly it was the invoicing. They had rolled out the new invoicing screens, and then they took them away, and then they put them back. And that's a significant part of the book. And then they also started realigning the menu, which that needed to be changed, that whole business view versus accountant view,
Yeah.
trying to write a book about guessing which menus someone's going to be using.
And that was some of the challenge that we had back in the old days when I was writing with the desktop as well, with toggling into the different versions, trying to explain that you could be into the premier contractor version or the premier nonprofit version or manufacturing, or because you have the different versions of premier or enterprise. So it is a challenge when you're dealing with different versions and editions, and then especially with online, you're getting updates every 6 weeks or so. And that is extremely challenging.
And that's where it took me 4 tries at the QuickBooks Online for Dummies to finally crack the code, because the previous author used QuickBooks Advanced and basically started from the biggest version and wrote down. And so I continued that. But then this year I was like, but there was a lot of reviews, like people were having a hard time finding what they needed, partly because they're having to read through stuff they can't do. And so my breakthrough this year was the first 7 chapters are everything that you can do in any version of QuickBooks, from simple start.
I love that. Yeah.
And then 2 chapters on essentials, what that adds. And then a couple chapters on plus, what that adds. And then advanced. And so it's, okay. You can go directly to what.
And that's a great approach, so you don't overwhelm people with a bunch of stuff that they're not using. And I think especially for a dummy book, that's perfect. Don't show me all this stuff that I'm not using. Don't confuse me with things that I'm not using. So I love that approach.
Thank you. And the other author had one of the things that cleaned up in one of the early iterations. What I felt like this choose your adventure. She'd start talking about a topic and say, if you want to read more about it, go to chapter X. And I'm like, that's just bring it all together. So last year I brought it all together, but it wasn't version specific. And the version specific, that's going to change everything with the book.
Yeah. How does that, one of the things that I think is helpful about books about technical stuff is that you can just, if you want a nugget, like how do you go to just that area and how do you plan that out in the book itself? But is that something that you've been like that you weigh those options when you're trying to think of what would the reader want to get out of this book? Or is it really, I need you to read it cover to cover in order to get the most out of it?
No, there's no way anybody's going to read a book like that from cover to cover. They're just, they want to get in and get out. And so I try to put myself in the reader's chair. What would I want to learn if I was new to the software? And it's through that's where I finally had that epiphany about let's segregate the content by subscription level. So that way, if you have a lower level, you just have to read the chapters about plus in advance because it's not applicable.
Right.
And sometimes it just takes more iterations than the previous author, her writing style was different than mine. She was fond of putting the second half in front of the sentence in front of the first half, which in my view creates kind of some stilted writing. And then it's already accounting software. And when your sentence structure is difficult. And so it took me a couple of versions to clean that up. And then last year I kind of grouped things together, but that wasn't quite the sweet spot. Now it's in the sweet spot.
Yeah. And you've found a way to inject humor into an accounting technical book, which I applaud you, for doing that. All right. So let's do a poll here. So I'm going to launch a poll and I'm going to stop sharing so that David can take over. And now the polls went somewhere. Where are they? There. Oh. All right. What version of QuickBooks do you use and support in the different flavors? As we were talking about that sort of thing of the different flavors of QuickBooks Online as well as desktop is something that you can put multiple answers to. It looks like Plus is leading the pack
there. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Swinging back around to Excel and talking about Excel and all that. And you were talking about how powerful it is and how much you can do and everything. I think one of the challenges, because I was looking at it and I was looking at your slides and going over it, and thank you for that and everything. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh yeah. And I think that's one of the things is a lot of it that are of a certain experience level. I'm not going to say old, but then again, experience level. A lot of us, we learned Excel. And then what happened is they kept adding all these great new, very powerful features onto it. We may not have ever learned that. And if we didn't have a need for it come up, we just we missed it. You know what I
Right.
mean? That
Yes, completely.
we didn't learn about it. So I think there's a lot of very powerful features there that a lot of it's just missed because we were busy working and just overlooked it. So I think there's a lot of powerful stuff that we just overlooked and missed throughout the years. You know what I mean?
That's what I teach in my Excel webinars. And I'll be honest, with Power Query, I knew it was out there for a few years, and I was like, why do I need to learn that? I have all these other ways of doing stuff.
Yeah.
And there's always a price of admission to these new features. My goal is to hopefully demystify and at least give a little running start on Power Query. I can't get very deep today, but the automation that you can do with Power Query without writing any code, and then it's just the set and forget, is truly amazing, particularly for transforming reports. If we had more time, I'd show you, because another thing that's frustrating about QuickBooks is there will be a piece of data that's on a different report and you just can't add that column. And so I have long described QuickBooks as feeling like that proverbial monkey. There's a banana in the jar and he can reach in, he can feel the banana, but he can't get his hand and the banana out at the same time. Data in QuickBooks feels like that. It's like it's stuck.
You know it's there, but you just can't get it.
Right.
I want that banana. Yeah. So it looks like I'm sharing the results here. It looks like Plus is the most commonly used version of QuickBooks Online. And then a tie with Essentials and Desktop. Now, some of the things that you can do that you're going to talk about with Power Query, you can do the same thing in Desktop or Online, right?
Correct. I do want to lead off with kind of a treat for QuickBooks Advanced users. This only works in the Advanced subscription, but there's a lot of us attending today that are using that. If you click the gear button at the top left-hand, the settings button at the top left right-hand corner, and then choose backup company. So you're not going to see backup company in the lesser subscriptions, but in Advanced you will. And then step 3, if you go to local backup, because one, QuickBooks Online Advanced lets you create backups that stay in the cloud. You can also create a local backup. And the first time that you click on local backup, it's going to ask you to link your Dropbox and or Google Drive account. Works with either one. And once you've done that linking, you then get a button that says, I want a new local backup. And so you choose your advanced company, you choose whether you want to put it in Dropbox or Google Drive, you click create new local backup. And what happens, I'm going to pull over a folder over here. After a few minutes, a zip file shows up on your computer.
I'm not seeing that. There we go.
Now, I know it's not showing up.
It's on the other screen.
Yep. Come on.
It's coming along. Pull it in. There we go.
So if I go to my Dropbox, which for me, mapped it to DropX just to make it easier. So in my Dropbox account, you're going to find that you're going to have an apps folder that gets added. So you get that automatically. And then within apps, I guess ChronoBooks is the company that does this facilitation. So inside ChronoBooks, you'll then see a folder for each company that you create a local backup for. So this is the company that I use to write the book from. So if I go in there, created a couple different backups, and these are zip files that when you open the zip file, you're going to see you basically got the keys to the kingdom. These are going to be CSV files of all your QuickBooks data. Accounts, payments, bills, classes, departments, 22 different files. And you can use Power Query to connect to the zip file. So on this page here, talking about Mark White's BI blog, he shows how you can basically copy and paste some stuff into Power Query, and you connect to the zip file. And then in Power Query, you see those 22 different CSV files. And any of those you can then dump over into Excel. So for advanced users, rather than having to get data out one at a time. So this is going to be a snapshot. Obviously, you have new transactions, you'll create a new local backup, but that's just a glimpse of what's possible there.
So that allows people who are focused primarily on QuickBooks Online to work with their clients' data without the need for desktop, or make some kind of flows, make some kind of local working where they're not in the file itself, maybe making some changes, running some Power Queries as the name.
You can assemble a dashboard based on that would present all kinds of data.
That was when you addressed this. This was the mind blowing aspect of what you can really do with Excel in conjunction with QuickBooks Online.
What was that?
When you presented this topic, this part was like the mind blowing part for me of what you can do with Excel and QuickBooks Online.
Yes, no, and when I took over the book, there was no chapters on Excel, and I'm a firm believer that any accounting software book needs to have chapters on Excel, because to me, otherwise it's like teaching forestry without someone with chainsaws. Excel is such a key tool because you're always going to need to pull that data out and do something with it. And so most folks are going through the file menu to access their files. Anytime we get through the file menu, that's a manual set of tasks. We're going to be going through the data menu, and that's where the automation lies in Excel. But let's say you said something, Michelle?
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, people didn't understand this. And you said something really quickly that was really powerful. So I was going to say, can you explain again what you meant? And you said something, you said you could even create a dashboard. And you said it really quickly.
Yes, I did.
That was a very valuable nugget, and I don't want it to get lost. And a lot of people said, I'm not understanding. Can you explain this again? So this is great information. So can you say it again slower for dummies that are listening to you? This is great stuff. So can you go over it again and explain that nugget that you said, the dashboard? Because this is great stuff.
All right, so let me do this. So with Power Query, I could attach directly to the zip file, but we don't have time for me to get real deep. So we're just going to cheat a little bit here. And I'm going to export these.
We've backed up our QBO, and these are all the folders or all the files that it made for us when we backed up QBO.
Correct. So I'm exporting
extracting the compressed file.
Exporting the files to my desktop, hopefully.
Yeah, and so some of the people too were asking, the backup is included with the QBO Advanced, but you can get those third-party apps like Rewind and some other ones that you can add on. Yeah, those stuff.
Right.
It's not available for the Plus client.
The beauty of this is that normally QuickBooks is so stingy about letting you access your data. It has gotten a little bit better with Spreadsheet Sync. That again requires the advanced subscription, but to have kind of a way to just dump all your data out to CSV files. So now that I've created those files, I'm going to go over to Excel.
And how long does it typically take for a backup to complete? Of course, it's going to depend on how much data needs to happen, but it's pretty quickly.
It was a few minutes.
Yeah.
Excel load. Okay, so here's Excel. So when we want to get data into Power Query, we're going to go to our data menu. If we're using Excel 2019 or later, we have a get data command. Just for benefit of folks using Excel 2016, to the right a little bit, there's a new query command that uses, so they change the name of the button. So it's either new query or get data, but here I'm going to choose get data from file. And then because these are CSV files, I'm going to say from text/CSV. And it's going to give me an import data screen where I'll be able to pick my text file. Let's throw that on my desktop. And so I'm going to grab there was an invoice file. So I'm going to grab invoices. And what's going to launch on the screen here is what's called the Power Query Editor. Actually gives you a preview first. So if I were to click load, that would just take this data and just load it to the spreadsheet directly. But we can see there's a whole bunch of files here, a whole bunch of columns. I don't need all those columns. So I'm going to click transform data, because one thing Power Query lets you do is pick and choose the data that comes in. And you can do this with Excel reports that you dump out of QuickBooks. So sometimes the reports don't give you an option. They're like, you're getting these 20 columns, whether you want them or not. Power Query, you can go in and go into choose columns, and you can turn the fields on and off that you want. So like, I don't need invoice ID or updated at. So
is there any columns or fields that are missing that you found in when it does this mass export through the backup of the data? Or is there things that you can't do? Somebody's mentioning that spreadsheet sync misses so many fields, right? Like you can, and that's like the challenge of using the spreadsheet sync, is that you're limited to what they're able to grab from.
Right. You get to a point and then you stop. I haven't worked real deeply with these fields, but we can see them going through this invoice file. It's got a lot of different columns here. This is far more information than we get on a report in QuickBooks. And so I'm just using the arrow keys and the space bar to turn these fields off, because most of these fields I don't want it. You want the description, the amount, maybe the item ID.
And this is only an Excel function, right? It is not something that is in Google Sheets anywhere.
No, Google Sheets does not have Power Query. So this is a Microsoft product. All right. So now here's a great example where it shows you the customer ID and their numbers. And then you're like, oh, what do I do with that? I can go to new source and go to file and go to CSV. And I'm going to pick the customer file.
And that customer ID is actually the number of that QuickBooks assigns to the list element.
It's a record ID in QuickBooks. So there's those customer IDs. So I'm going to click OK. So the customer ID, we'll go over to the right, there is the company name there. So if I want the company name on my invoice file, I can use a merge query. Now, there's two options here. If I click the merge queries button, I would be then modifying the invoices import that I did. But I'm going to click the drop down button. I'm going to say merge queries is new, because what I like to do is keep each data source intact. So I have an audit trail of how I got here. So I'm going to merge the invoices table, and I want to merge it with the customers table. And what I have to do is pick the common field between the two tables, which is this customer ID. So when I click OK, now, first time I did this in Power Query, I got over to the right and I saw that it just had this table, this column is just this table. I'm like, I brought my data in, but where's the data? This little button at the top, this is an expand button. So if I click that, I can then get access to all the fields that are in the other table. Now, for this little exercise for our dashboard where we're headed here, I'm just going to click on company name and click OK. And I'm going to take that, I'm going to drop it back over here. So notice I can move columns around in whatever order that I want. And so I don't need that customer ID anymore. So I can go back up to choose columns, and I can turn off the customer ID because I now have the company name. I can double click at the top and I can rename this. So I can just call this customer. But another thing about Power Query is, because many times we pull data out of QuickBooks, we're manually doing this effort to try to massage the data to get the way we want it. And then one, if your data changes, you got to go do all that again. But two, you can't really walk backwards in your process. Power Query lets you walk backwards because each thing I'm doing is adding an applied step over here. And when I click on these applied steps, I get to see what the data looked like at that point. So when I go back up to the source step, I don't see, well, there's that customer table because that shows up because I did the merge, but I don't see the customer field. When I click on expanded customers, now that column is expanded. Now that column got moved back over to the left. Now I removed some of the other columns and then I renamed the column. And so you can walk through your transformation. But then, so if I take this data here, if I click close and load, it's going to put it in what's known as a table. And I can do a couple different things with it. One of my favorite features in Excel, particularly for data that I've gotten out of Power Query, is the slicer feature. So on the table design menu, if I click insert slicer, let's say I click on customer, and then I click OK. This gives me a list of all the customers on the report. And if I click, then I see just the records. The other thing I can do with these results is because this is a table, I can turn on a total row. Now, the last column is going to get a total, so it's adding up the item IDs, which is not applicable here. But if I clicked over here and shows sum, then it would add up those values. Now, notice there's some duplication in this report, but we're assuming that this had real data because this is just made up data for the book. But I could also, if I went to insert slicer, if I chose the item ID, because I'd have to merge the item IDs in as well, but I'd be able to filter for that. So let's not do item ID, let's do state. Say I want to filter by state. So if I go to table design, insert slicer, and pick the state. Do I have the state? All right, we'll just do city. Maybe they called it, maybe this is it. So this shows me all the states. If I clicked on Florida, that's my one customer in Florida. If I clicked on Louisiana, that's my customer in Louisiana. So this is allowing me, so this alone could be a dashboard of sorts, but also if I go to the insert menu and I choose pivot table, pivot tables are a report writing feature. If I have a list of data, either in a table or just a regular list, I can click OK. And let's say, how do I want to summarize this? Maybe I want to summarize it by state. So there's a list of my states. If I click on amount, there's my amounts. I could then add the customer name there. And so notice there's these buttons here that on the Analyze tab, it's in this active field group. There's a button that says Collapse Field. If I click that, hides all the customers, but I can then drill in and see who's in a given segment. And so with Power Query, we saw how I pulled in the invoices file and then the customers file. I can pull in as many different data sources as I want. They all land in Excel. I can then create multiple pivot tables that I can control with slicers. And that's how I'm then getting a view on my terms from QuickBooks. They're trying, they've made that dashboard screen that you can do some charts and dashboards, but you never have complete control. So this kind of unlocks things and gives you more complete control.
And then the power of Power Query is that once you set up the breadcrumb trail, you can always get back to the cottage, right? Because you've already set that in place, and then you would just run the Power Query. How do you go back to, okay, next month I've created all this wonderful stuff with pivot tables and that. What do I do next month when it comes to doing that again?
Next month, you would take these CSV files, you would export them over the previous files. And then in Excel, you would just go to refresh all, and it would refresh all the data. So the work that you do in the Power Query editor initially, that's a one-time event. It's not where you're exporting a report to Excel and then every time to make the donuts, time to clean up my report to get down to the format that I need. It's a set and forget transformation.
So you basically save all that in the Excel workbook, and then you just get overwrite the source and then refresh the data from the Excel spreadsheet, and you've done it. And a few minutes as opposed to always needing to bake the cake.
Exactly. And so just to show, normally this would be catastrophic. I've taken my name over every piece of data on my report and the data would be gone. But if I click refresh all, Power Query reaches out to the CSV file, brings in the data. It wouldn't matter if let's say I had gone in and deleted a bunch of rows. As long as I keep some of the connection, if I click refresh all, brings it right back. So it's going to give me some resilience, sticking a second forward to bring it in. But we get this resilience that we don't normally have in Excel, because normally we're like, our spreadsheets are brutal. Like, oh, I can't type over that because then I won't have an audit trail of what it was before. Here, everything is connected to data that came out of QuickBooks, and you're cutting out the middleman. You're not having to do any kind of massaging or whatever. It's just, there's your data.
Yeah. And that kind of addresses some of the challenges that accountants and bookkeepers have, because Intuit is constantly making changes to the way that the navigation, the menus,
Yes.
Everything that causes us to go bonkers. Like, where did that go now? You can, okay, you do your thing into it. I'm going to do my thing over here.
So just to give a vision of a dashboard, I'm going to create another pivot table here. So we're going to insert pivot table. Now this one, I'm going to put it on my other worksheet over here. And so let's say that this one, I don't have a whole lot of data to work with here, but I'm just going to choose city and then amount. So that shows me all the cities. So let's say that I add a slicer to this. And let's say that I want to filter on that. We'll just do description. So either the description's blank or it says opening balance. On this, if I right click on this slicer, there's a report connections button. But if I click that, I can link the first pivot table to it and control both of them at once. If I want to see all my opening balance data, I click. Now these totals represent just opening balance transactions. If I click this blank one there, I guess the transactions must be in there twice or something. That's why the numbers are the same. Again, I don't have a clean, this is an ad hoc thing, but basically if we had real descriptions here, if you get different item IDs, if you clicked on that, you would see both pivot tables adjust, and then you'd be able to see who bought what in which state and then what cities that represented in those amounts. But this expands to any data that's in those CSV files. I just picked this just as something that's an easy reference point, but whatever it is that's important to you that you want to track and see, because also within a pivot table, if we go down to, let's say, value filters and we say top 10, it's really top X, where X is whatever number you want it to be. If I want to see the top 5 cities that are selling my products, I can say top 5, click OK. So now that's my top 5 cities. And I could right click on this and sort it. And now I've got it ranked in descending order. And if next month I took next month's data, saved it over the CSV files, did refresh all, then this would just update.
My mind is blown. Y'all, you're quiet as well. Are you getting all this? Is it as exciting for you as it is for me?
It is. It is really amazing and mind blowing. And Edward was just asking, this is awesome. And he's saying, can we get to the data set other than through the QBO advanced backup? And I was just answering, you could use spreadsheet thing to get to some of the data. But in others, you could use the export the report to Excel and try to do it that way. Because at any of those reports, you would be able to do it. But the best way is going to be to the full backup so that you can have the customers and the data.
And not everybody has that subscription level. So the slides do show. So let's go back to one of the slides because this might give a little frame of reference because folks saw a lot of things cold there. Let's say that you had a profit and loss report. The one that I like to create in QuickBooks is I like to go to reports and choose profit and loss, change it to this year. So it shows me the entire year, but then the columns, I change that to months. So it gives me 12 months. A lot of folks export like the January report and then they'll do the February report. They end up with 12 reports. I try to group things together when I can. And so having a 12-month report that'll get populated as the year goes on gives me all that income statement, all the profit and loss data. I like to turn off the headers because that ends up being extra noise in Excel. And I turn off the footers as well. And so if you find this report helpful, you can click Save Customization. You can give it a name. It would show up on your custom reports choice. You click Save. You have to click Run to actually get the report. Once you export it to Excel, that's when we would do, let's do our second poll question.
That, where'd it go? Here. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. What type of data do you export? I wanted to point something out though, David. On the prior slide you had where it could only have export to Excel, export to PDF, or the management reports. We had Hector and Mark on the Power Hour for their Right Tool extension, and they have, that's one of their features, is that it turns everything into, just send it to a CSV. So regardless of what report you're on, what level of subscription that you're on, any report can be sent to a CSV. So it cleans off all that header stuff.
Okay. Yes.
Right away. Save a few clicks each time.
The CSV format is always much cleaner and it will avoid a lot of frustration.
And that is a tip that I didn't know. So thank you guys very much for that. And here is another tip. So Jessica had asked the question, and I was answering and talking with her a little bit in the chat and the Q&A over there. She had a client that had a really big mess and it needed to be cleaned up. And the client didn't want them to just start over, which sometimes it's better when you got a disaster to just start over and redo things, since we can import transactions and everything. Anyhow, long story short, she wanted to know, should we just get the backup, pull it out of QBO, fix everything, and then re-import and overwrite the data? And my comment was, no, we want the audit trail of what we've done and what we've corrected. But what are your thoughts on that, David and Dan? When you've got a disaster situation and you need to fix things, what are your thoughts on that? If you've got the backup situation, should you pull it out of QBO, fix everything, and then upload the corrected file? Or my comment was, no, even if you do figure out what all the corrections need to be made and just upload some overall adjusting entries, I think you need to have an audit trail of what you're correcting, not just upload an adjusted file. What are your all's thoughts?
I would want to upload to a new company. I would want to keep the old company as the archive and then upload into a new company. I would be okay with that, but I would not overwrite the existing company. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. One thing that Spreadsheet Sync does allow you to do, if you have an advanced subscription, is it does allow you to edit transactions. You can pull, let's say, all of the checks that you wrote out to Excel. You can make adjustments and you can post those adjustments back to QuickBooks. And that's a pretty safe approach. You do have to be careful because when you're working wholesale like that, you can wreak some havoc. You copy something down, you didn't realize you overwrote things you didn't mean to. You got to respect the feature. But if you're take your time and do it right, then that can help mitigate those situations.
Yeah, definitely. One of those things where if you don't have an damage control plan in place, that could be, you could jump from the frying pan right into the fire with that type of situation. And I appreciate what you were saying, David, about put it in another place, fresh snow, make your snow angels, rather than trying to build a snowman that somebody's already trampled over.
Yeah. And Jessica says she wanted to upload it to a new file. So I may have misspoke on saying upload it and overwrite it. So that was my bad. Yes. Great comments there. Great discussion. Okay. Sorry. Continue on there.
No, you're fine. No, this is great.
All right. We are.
Hopefully.
What else do you got for us? Because I don't know if we can take more in here.
The next thing I wanted to show is whenever, by default, when you download a file from QuickBooks, it launches in that protected view. And For some reason, this file is stuck. Or why it's taking so long. Let's just try downloading it again. So that protected view can hijack your report because it ends up being a speed bump that you have to deal with every time that you you open the file. All right, I'm just going to improvise here. File, open, browse. We're going to do profit and loss by class. And just to simulate, I'm going to click the little button. So on the open menu here, just a little aside, there is a choice that says open and repair. If you ever get a spreadsheet that says it's corrupted, and rather than panicking, you can click on that open and repair and click open and repair it. I'm going to actually choose the choice above it, which is open and protected view, just so we can see what that protected view bar looks like. And one of the weird things that protected view does is that it can hide the amounts, particularly when we export reports in QuickBooks. If you're seeing the file in protected view, it's going to seem like it's all zeros until you click that enable content button. But rather than having to click enable content every single time, there are settings that we can change. So here's what protected view looks like. Now on this report, we are able to see some amounts here, but we have to then stop and click enable editing before we can do anything with it. So rather than doing that over and over again, if you instead do a one-time change in Excel, if you go to the file menu, if you go to options, we're going down to the trust center, going over to the trust center settings. When you get to protected view, which is step 5, you can clear the first and third checkboxes. Leave the middle one alone, but the first and third ones, that will turn off that protected view. And then you can just open your spreadsheet without having to have another thing catching your sleeve as you're trying to get your work done.
One less click is always a good thing.
One thing I was really
precious seconds are saved, and that when you add that up, that's going to be a lot of time.
One of my previous favorite tricks to show about QuickBooks Online is that in Google Chrome, there used to be a setting where you could have it open the spreadsheet automatically. So then it became, if you turned off protected view, then it became this seamless, Excel became a seamless extension of QuickBooks. Over the summer, they took that away. And so now when you download something, it shows up in the downloads. You have to manually click on it. You can't just have it launch automatically. So that's disappointing because that was every click we can save accumulates. But once we've exported that P&L, looks like I looked out a slide that actually did the import. But another trap, if you will, is if your report has dates that are headings. There's an enticing little feature that says use first row as headings, where you could take that first row and promote it to the heading bar. And just to show you, like I say, my guide, if you click use first row as headers and that first row has dates that can change, when we get to 2024 and your report only says January 24, February 24, and so on, Power Query will not let you import that file because it thinks that the field names are different. So rather than clicking use first row as headers, what I do is I manually change the heading on each column. So that way I can identify it, but then I can keep using this import year after year. But other things that we can do with Power Query, we could click on a column. So if I right click on the account column, I can say transform and trim. That would eliminate the spaces that QuickBooks adds. QuickBooks adds that spacing to the profit and loss report. If I right click on that column and say transform and trim, takes those spaces out. When I click close and load, then the data shows up in Excel. An additional step I can do is on the query tab, I can go to properties and change a couple properties about the query. So one thing I like to change is to turn off that enable background refresh. The intent of enable background refresh is that when it's refreshing, what we mean by refreshing is reaching out to that data source, that CSV file or Excel file, whatever we've attached to, and bringing in that data. If we do it in the background, it's going to be slower. And it's slow enough that sometimes I'm sitting there looking at the screen thinking, okay, is it actually doing what I want it to do? I like to turn that off, because by turning it off, then when Excel is refreshing, it can't do anything, but it happens so much quicker that it's a minor trade-off. But if I click refresh data when opening the file and then click enable fast data load and click OK, then when I open my spreadsheet that has Power Query, it just brings in the data. So for instance, let's say you have a report that QuickBooks does something strange to it. You downloaded that file as an Excel file, let's say. You import it with Power Query. You then can, set up your transformations. Going forward, you just take that Excel report, save over that initial file. When you open your workbook with Power Query, it would pull in the cleaned up data. And so going forward, you're just working with the cleaned up data. You're not having to reinvent the wheel to scrub your data to get it down to what you want.
That is so much of a time saver. And I think the one thing that is not resonating is that Power Query, and the power of Power Query is that you set this up once.
Yes.
And then once you have done like formatting the fields, mm-hmm. or anything, whatever you've done in Power Query, when you launch the workbook again,
yes,
and download new data mm-hmm. into the source, then you don't have to go through all of those memorization steps all over again.
Not at all. And that's what I liked about the CSV dump, is that gives you the keys to the kingdom and really can create a great setup there.
All right. And what else do you have for us? Because we're coming on the top of the hour.
So don't forget the refresh all command that refreshes the report, brings in a new copy of it. Once you set up a connection to Power Query, another thing is going to show up on what's called the message bar in Excel. Is now maybe you get rid of enable editing from the protected view, but then this enable content is going to pop up. If you click that button, you're relegating yourself to yet another manual click every time you open the file. Instead, if you go to the file menu, go to info, choose enable content, and then enable all content, that will suppress that prompt. This one's on a workbook by workbook basis. Protected view is for all your Excel files. But that way you don't end up with that extra prompt that you have to deal with each time.
Last.
Another poll question.
And here. How often do you use Power Query? Go ahead.
Information. This has been fabulous information, David. It's been great. Everybody in here is just loving it. And Paul wants to know, where can we buy Power Query? It's QB Power Query. Where can we buy QB Power Query?
Well, Power Query is built into Excel, so there's nothing to buy. If by chance you're using an outdated version of Excel, like Excel 2010 or 13, it's a free download for those versions. But it's built into the Excel interface.
Do you have to, can you use it in the online, like the online 365, or does it have to be on a locally installed
So Excel for the web, they call it Excel for the web. It has some rudimentary Power Query capabilities that not like it does for Excel, but the Mac, usually the Mac is the stepchild version, and the Mac has Power Query as well. So you're not out in the cold if you're using a Mac either.
Good to know.
Another.
Do you have a few extra moments, David, to stay with us a little bit? Do you have a few extra moments to stay with it over the top of the hour?
I sure do.
Okay. So to the rest of what you had for us.
Just a couple things. One, let's say that you create a connection to Power Query and then you don't want it to be connected to that file anymore. On the query menu, you can click delete. That's not going to delete the data. It's just going to break the connection. If you wanted to send the file to your client, but you didn't want it tied to anything on your computer, then that delete button lets you break the query connection. When we click the edit button on the query tab, that puts us back in the Power Query editor. If on the applied steps, if there's a little gear to the right, that means you can edit that step. I can click on the source button and pick a different P&L. So let's say I make this great P&L report for a certain client and I want to share it with another client. I can make a copy of that Excel workbook, go into the Power Query editor in the source button, link, to this other file, that different data, but same format. And then it's good to go. Everything else just flows. So the other thing that I was going to do if we had more time, these slides just show how you could take so another thing that's frustrating about QuickBooks, I could go on with things that are frustrating about QuickBooks, but the customer list takes the shipping address and puts it on 2 lines. And if I'm trying to do mailing labels, if I'm trying to break it out into columns, then we're staying on our head to deal with that. Just jumping ahead, Power Query lets you split a column by a delimiter, which, Michelle, you might be familiar with the text to columns feature in Excel. It lets you break columns up in Excel, but this is that on steroids because I can separate things by colon, which I can do with text to columns, but I can also break it into columns based upon a line feed. So suddenly that data that's on that report that's in 2 rows, if I break it into on the line feed, becomes a new column. Then all of a sudden my data is on 1 row. It's not on multiple rows. And I can take columns, I can merge them together, I can separate them back out. The sky's the limit what we can do. I can remove duplicates. So on a customer contact list, if you're using jobs, that customer name is going to show up multiple times. I can remove the duplicates. So I can then just have a nice clean version of my report, which it doesn't come out clean in QuickBooks because the addresses can be in multiple rows. They might show up multiple times. All this stuff can just go away.
This is
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So last poll here. What takeaways did you take away from today besides the fact that your brain is probably ready to ooze out your ears from the nuggets of information that David's been able to cram into this? Yeah, David, I thank you for taking the time to come on and talk about this. The slides that are available on the website. I love the way that you have each step numbered there. So if you watch the replay as you're going through, because this is probably, if you glanced or looked away, you might have missed something, missed the nugget. So there are this gives you a great way to rewatch the webinar if you need to, and then follow along with the steps.
Can you go to the slide with his additional training? So you have a slide with the link that shows about the training that David has.
Yeah, I think it was on your bio side.
To say there is a slide missing from the slide deck, Dan. I'm going to fix that and send you the new slide. So steps 1 through 8 in this process, they're not. And that's a mess. This goes from 1 to 8 and this goes to 9. There's a difference.
They're not connected.
That I will plug that in and get that to you.
Okay, appreciate
that. But places to find my training, I have a website that's professionalsexcel.com. Those courses are not available for CPE. NASBA has all these requirements, and I just haven't had enough demand yet to warrant that. But CPEthink.com has on-demand versions. I teach live classes for my CPE, so I want to mention that. CCHCPLink.com, CPEcredit.com. I'm teaching in a lot of different live places, so if you want live training, let me know. My personal website is davidringstrom.com, so you can see a lot of my stuff there.
I'm just going to share the takeaways. We've had some wonderful takeaways for our group here. Appreciate you again joining us and taking the time to join us today. And I look forward to working with you on many books.
Thank you. It should be easier going forward.
Yeah. Fantastic. So we did run a little over. I appreciate everyone for sticking around that I could. We are going to have the replay, and we'll also have those updated slides for the right step 1 through 8, so that you can check that out on the QB Power Hour. Hopefully you join us again for the next time. And Michelle, always great to see you. And David, thanks again for joining us. Any closing thoughts, Michelle?
That's great information. So thanks again, David. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
My pleasure. I love seeing all the feedback. Thanks, guys.
We hope you enjoyed listening to the QB Power Hour podcast. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in our Facebook group. You can find those resources and much more at qbpowerhour.com.